today's going to be a fun things hidden discussion. I'm joined by someone who hails high atop the Mariana Trench, deep in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, west of the Rockies for sure. We have with us Cyprian. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, David.
Yeah, you're so west of the Rockies, you're east of the Rockies, I guess.
That's what they say. This is where America starts its day, they say. So we are always a day ahead of everyone else in the world, it seems.
And how's the fish over there? You guys doing good?
Oh, fantastic. One of the best places for fishing. There's been no commercial fishing here. So people just go out recreationally, spear fishing, the whole nine, and it's just packed full of anything you could imagine. It's just incredible. It's incredible here.
Well, very good. So it's interesting because you're on, we were just talking before we started here, you're on the outskirts of the American Empire proper. Now, the American Empire has many satellite states. They're not officially recognized as an outlet of, as official members of the American Empire, but you're about as far as you can get while still being in the actual domestic American Empire. How did you get over there?
That's right. Yeah. It was providential, I would say.
Somebody told you to put your mask over your nose and you said, I'm going to Saipan.
It was pretty close to that. Yeah. When things started to shut down, my family and I were in Southern California. That's where I'm from. We had just had our second daughter. And so we had moved back to be around family. She was about 1 year old. And then stuff started shutting down. And some friends of ours had come out here. They said, hey, man, it's great. They were, when California shelves were emptied of toilet paper and tortilla chips, they were like, man, people aren't doing that here. Yeah. And it's just a beautiful space, beautiful place, beautiful island, beautiful Commonwealth. And, I am able to work remotely. I've been doing that for years and years. And my businesses are all enable me to be anywhere, basically. And so I asked my wife, hey, you want to go ride this out on a tropical island, literally at the end of the empire? I used that exact term. And she said, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And so we came out, and it's been wonderful being here. We've really enjoyed it.
Now, of course, we connected through your work as one of the hosts of the Royal Path podcast. Did you start that once you reached Saipan, or how does that fit in the timeline?
Yes, I did. That we've been going for just about a year now with the Royal Path, and I do that with my spiritual father, Father Turbo Qualls, and also a fellow brother in Christ, Andrew Funk. It was an idea that germinated, I think, amongst the men in Father Turbo's parish to start talking about some of the issues that have been going on, obviously, over the last 2 years. And it was actually when I was here. I'm a Bitcoin developer and entrepreneur. That's what I do full time, as I'm in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry and the software side. And I had begun a little school, something that had come to me during prayer. I had begun a little school to teach people about Bitcoin. And actually, the first group that came through was this group of Orthodox Christian men who were all part of this parish, and their priest happened to be there as well. And, I'd heard about this Serbian Orthodox priest who, was heavily tattooed and had been in punk rock and all of this type of thing. And, we were doing this Zoom class, and all of a sudden here he pops up, and I'm like, and you've had Father Turbo on. And so I think people would know he's not what you would expect if somebody says a Serbian Orthodox priest. Yeah. And I said, okay, well, this is pretty interesting. And looked at some of the content that he had out there over the years, found it very interesting. And I was just coming back to Christ at the time. The things in 2020 had really started to lead me back to that. And I knew nothing about Orthodoxy. And
your background's in film, right? Hollywood, or?
Yeah, I mean, my background's in software. I spent 6 or 7 years doing the Hollywood thing. I wound up as a star of a TV show, kind of just randomly, that ended up being a long running TV show. Who knew? And so then it gave me the opportunity to do a lot of behind the camera stuff. I had some background. I'm from LA. And so it was sort of a mix between software and media. Which has been helpful to see some of the things that have been going on in the world. For me, it really especially coming from the type of TV. So it was reality TV, coming from out of that and seeing how narratives are crafted and crafty editing and, propaganda, these sorts of things. And having studied it, became really clear to me what was going on. And that was also clear to Father Turbo after I got a chance to talk to him. I thought he was very, very interesting. We are clicking on a lot of the same things. And he was really my entree to, as I say, he's my spiritual father. He was my entree to Orthodoxy, and he catechized me. And actually, he and a reader from his parish, who's now actually a deacon, flew out here and baptized me, actually.
Wow.
So I was actually baptized here on this island. So
is there any Orthodox churches in the island?
There are not, but there is a Russian community. So we're only about a 4-hour flight from Vladivostok. So we're actually relatively close to Russia. And this place used to have its own immigration system. It has its own customs. It used to have its own immigration where it could determine its visas and all of that. They really abused that. There was a big scandal in the 90s with Abramov, and some people may know that it was a big scandal. And it was all about this place here and the way that they were using their immigration. So for the last 20 years, Russians could travel here visa free. Before Trump, he shut it down. And so there's a big Russian community. A lot of them married locals and stuck around. My wife happens to be Russian. My wife is Russian. She's Orthodox. My children are Orthodox. I was the one in the house who wasn't Orthodox.
What were you, just not? You were just a nun at the time, or something? I was
baptized as an infant Roman Catholic and raised in the Episcopal Church. So I had been around it, and then a little spat of evangelical. But I had been away from, obviously, being in Hollywood and all of that. I had been definitely far away from the church. And, I was. They
don't have Bible studies on set here where you were at?
Nope, you're not going to find a lot of that. Not on a big money TV show. You're not going to find much Bible study. You'll find some pretty light left-wing occultist type of stuff. You'll find plenty of that, but you won't find a Bible around. I'll say that.
Are they all LARPing, that occultist stuff you're talking about?
Some are, yeah. Some aren't. Some aren't. If you're looking for the place where the spells are cast, that's where it is, man. That's where it is. It's in Hollywood. So there's certainly some there's people who are not LARPing in that sphere for sure.
So how do you get do you have someone fly over to give you communion every, how do you do that? You're a Hollywood guy.
Well, it's yeah, that was a while ago. That money's been burnt through. It's all righteous money now.
Did you put it in Bitcoin?
Some of it I did for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Father Turbo came out here last June, baptized me. So obviously we had services, and that was wonderful. The Russian community was very thankful for that as well. So we got a chance to have the Eucharist and to have liturgy and all of that. Interestingly enough, he had only been gone for about maybe a month or a month and a half. It was actually July 4th of last year that randomly we were on the beach for July 4th, and up shows a Russian Orthodox priest, full cassock,
just came out of the water.
Cross. It seemed like it. It's crazy because I had taken my daughter. I just stood up from where I was. All of our friends were there at the table. Took my daughter down to the water, which was close, 20, 30 feet away. We're playing in the waves a little bit. I turn around, and sitting right next to my wife is a fully vested Russian priest, right? Not fully vested, but he's in a cassock, right? With a pectoral cross. And I walked up shocked. And he actually has a parish in Taiwan, and he's a mission priest. He regularly goes on missions around. His name is Father Kirill Skarbel. And he said he had just decided to come to the Marianas. Church records said no Russian priest had been here for 200 years.
Wow.
And the last one that had just sort of gone by. So it was very weird to then be able, Father Turbo had left icons. They'd left all kinds of books. They'd left incense and everything so that we could do Typica here, the lay services, which we do every Sunday. And then, as priests show up, when they do, then we're able to get the Eucharist. So, The Lord has delivered in the way that he's going to deliver, but it's been quite the experience. And so we've been holding down orthodoxy for Saipan since that time.
Pretty soon you're going to have a monastery with monks doing Bitcoin mining, huh?
Right. The monk miners. Yeah, it's good. It's very interesting.
That's interesting. So you can figure out how to get one of those quantum computers out of California and get those monks just plugging away at those things.
Maybe that's what's going to happen.
So anyway, so I it's interesting that you have this background because it informs, I guess, some of the things that you guys talk about on your podcast. I mean, I enjoyed talking to Father Turbo, and I got a lot of great feedback on that discussion. Just kind of let a free flowing conversation develop, learning a little bit about his background before I started. And it was quite an interesting conversation, but you guys have that on a regular basis. So what drives you to do that? Do you want to share the Orthodox faith with the world, or what's really animating your interest in doing those types of shows?
I think the particular project, what we saw, we were all seeing it. And Father Turbo just really articulated it and had a plan and a framework. He said that he was particularly moved. He hadn't had a big internet presence. There's a lot of people that like to talk with him, enjoy talking with him. I think people definitely enjoy hearing his opinion when he's talking about orthodoxy, and I think what he brings to the table is very unique. But he's a very private person in that way. But he had been moved because the Serbian patriarch had started an Instagram account and said, we have to do this now. Like, with what's going on, with what's happened, there's, a threat to the church. As I think it's clear, there's a threat to people of faith. There's been a threat to people of faith for the last 2 years, for sure. When a church gets shut down, when places that have been through the Black Plague, through bubonic plague, able to have liturgy and serve communion are shut down. Historic cathedrals and everything can't do it. Something's going on. And Father Turbo, not just in terms of sharing the faith, but there's the royal path is a reference to an Orthodox idea of the narrow gate, and not falling too far to the left or to the right, that either one of them is a sin. Either one of them is missing the mark. And so we had seen things swing very far to the spiritual left. And I think what we all anticipated, looking at history, knowing the way that these things go, is that the response would be a heavy swing to the right, which we're seeing now, actually. And this was, a year ago when Father Turbo had brought this up. I was seeing the same thing. And he said, I think it's very important. And I agree. He said, I think it's very important for us to talk about the royal path. The tradition has this here. It's been there since the beginning. And, this idea that, it's a narrow path. It's straight as the gate, and it's very easy to fall off on either way. So that's really what the show is about. That's what the project is about, is not taking, I think that there are a lot of conservative voices out there, and we are definitely conservative. There's no question about it. I mean, you can't be more conservative than Orthodox Christian, practicing Orthodox Christian, and certainly Orthodox clergy. But conservative doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to swing heavily to the right. It means that you'll recognize tradition, and the tradition has the balance between the two. And it's not necessarily political left or political right, because it's neither one of those. It's not a mushy middle. It's not about a compromise. It's about a turn towards the truth, which is Christ, and moving in that direction, and letting that be your guide as to not fall off in either direction, the spiritual left or the spiritual right. So that's really what the project is about. I am often remiss to speak about Orthodoxy outside of my own personal experiences. I'm not a theologian. I'm not clergy. I'm not even all that well read, to be honest, as compared to what there is to read relative to what could be read. I've read nothing when it comes to a 2,000-year-old tradition. So it's a lot of it is talking about our personal experience. And getting a chance, with our spiritual father and our confessor to sit and talk out loud in public, really. And
Are you more
it's been
left
good.
brain oriented or right brain oriented?
I think I have a pretty good balance between the two, because I definitely have a creative background. I mean, I was in music for a long time, and the music industry. I love being around art, and I think of myself as very creative. But at the same time, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I have to deal with both sides on a regular basis. I think when it comes to my spirituality, though, I am definitely more of a mystic than an intellectual in that regard. And that's what Orthodoxy really appeals to me in that way.
You mentioned the left and the right, but you also ruffled some feathers within the libertarian circles that you've traveled with, huh? You called a potential candidate a super predator like Hillary? Is that what you did?
I did call him a super predator. Yes,
ultra predator?
No, just a predator. I think that
just an ordinary predator.
One of the things that my own spiritual practice now has really helped me with is having a little more humility, and not necessarily being quick to say things that are provocative, even if they are accurate in the way that I am saying it. I think that right now what we have is, unfortunately, and this has been going on for a long time. There was the guy who, I always forget his name. It starts with an H. He's the one who built Facebook's their early data architecture. Mm-hmm. So very, very responsible for the success on the technical side of Facebook at an early time. Yeah. And he's got this quote where he says, the greatest minds of my generation spend their days focused on getting people to click ads, and that really sucks. That's his quote. And we have really a situation right now where the most talented, brilliant individuals who are out there, in many cases, once they gain success, and this happened to me, so it was not like, and I think the follow-up on that is, I said someone was a predator, and he said, well, why would you say that? And I said, well, it would take one to know one, because I was that, right? So I was at first pointing it back at myself to say, I recognize this pattern. It was a pattern that I had myself. And what it is that it is someone who is, whether you want to call it a parasite, whether you want to call it a predator. See, these are provocative terms. Nobody would want somebody to be called these, but it is
call America a nation of peddlers, right? Social engineers.
Could it all comes from the same idea. It comes from the idea that the number, the followers, the likes, the retweets, this number in a database equals virtue, and not the action itself. This is a gigantic flip that we have, right?
So you're saying like influencer culture in general here?
Yes, absolutely. But that it is
an influencer culture is predatory, right? By nature.
It has to be. Right, yeah. It has to be. Right? Because what you're doing is you are preying upon the most prurient, sinful interests. If it bleeds, it leads. Right? If it bleeds, it leads. This is the news, broadcast news. Right? And so I came from reality television. I spent time, all the producers there, people may not know this, the producers from reality TV historically have come from broadcast news. That's where they've cut their chops. Mm-hmm. So you get, if it bleeds, it leads. And so you wonder why, you look at the Kardashians. It's predatory. It's absolutely predatory, because they're going to give you the thing that appeals to the lowest, most wicked interest that you have, and because that's what keeps your eyes on it. So what I said at the time was, I said, well, look, he's not trying to eat your flesh. He's just trying to get your eyeballs. So this is what I meant. It's very easy. I think people stop, right? At the moment that you say predator, right? Of course, I explained it, but then what do you have? The same culture pulls a clip, right? And why do they pull that provocative clip
Because
and
they
not
want
the
to have a
rest that
scandal.
explains it.
They want to have a mimetic drama. Yeah.
Why? Because it's going to do exactly what I was talking about. Get the eyeballs.
Right.
It's the feedback loop, right? And this is what I was trying to say. But again, yes, it ruffles feathers. Unfortunately, the term is what draws everything, as opposed to the point that's being made, which I think very, very few people who were listening would actually argue at that point, or would argue that it was incorrect or off base. So, this is my own struggle. This is my own struggle of myself moving from out of that mode. And I fall, being provocative for the sake
That's
of being
something I
provocative.
talked to Father Turbo Qualls about, is how can I be successful in media when the nature of media is that you have to get a certain level of an audience or something so that you can pay the bills. I mean, so it's like, is the velocity of your likes and views an inverse relationship to the closeness to the truth that you speak? I don't know. I mean, it's very confusing, right?
This is the difficulty, but I think that there is Christ is the example in this case. I think a wonderful example. He had 12 guys. Like, those were his followers. He had 12 followers, and he had more. There were the 70 disciples and all of that. But we could say, he wasn't out there. Yes, there were multitudes that were listening, but were they really following? But look at what that turned into, right? Because of an orientation towards truth. And I think that that's where faith comes in, is to say, no, this is going to work out in the way that it's meant to work out, and I will be sustained by this. If I'll follow a righteous path, the Lord will sustain me. This is what faith is there for. This is what the tradition is there for. And it's very, very tough. It's very, very tough, because I mean, even from the beginning, in the gospel, the temptations of Christ were basically all about that. They were all about turn to the world and get the likes, get the follows, show everyone who you are, get the glory, get the kingdom, the power, and the glory, basically. But it's temporal, or have the kingdom, power, and glory forever. And that's that's where faith has to come in, because that's a hard sell. That's not, you can't sell that for $9.99 subscription every month. You know?
Yeah, because we want our role models and our influencers to be hard to get.
Yes. Yes.
We have to be hard to get. If you reply too quickly to an email, you're not so cool. And that's what Jesus is, to the fullest degree, is that he's not hard to get in that sense. I mean, he's unconditionally loving, and that's very unattractive to an influencer addicted culture. That's like, wait a second. I mean, if your love is not scarce, that means your love is cheap, and I don't desire it. Right? That's the way. That's the way it tends to go, right?
Yes, this is the flip. This is the paradox. This is the paradox of having the most abundant thing be the most, having the most abundant thing also be the most elusive. Because by our nature, we're not going to draw close to that thing. It's there, it's eternal, it's abundant. It's endless, boundless, but we have to move toward it. And the moving toward it is work. And the moving toward it is sacrifice. And, it's hard for somebody, especially if they don't get the instant gratification. It's an instant gratification culture, right? And that's what an influencer offers, is I'm bored right now. I'm bored right now. Open up my phone. Here it is. Dopamine hit. Okay, cool. Yes. Wow. Awesome. And over and over and over and over again. And the algorithm's pumping it through. And ultimately the influencer is they're a slave to the algorithm. They're going to do what it's this feedback loop between this demonic, this demonic formula and human beings at this point.
If Jesus is kind of in tension with the crowd, then why does the Christian religion ostensibly have the most followers on paper.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's those paradoxes. It's definitely those paradoxes, because it's the truth. I think that's really what it ultimately comes down to. You know, I think that that's how these paradoxes get solved, is that when we run into these conundra, but actually, okay, but somehow it's working. That's all. That's usually an indication to me that it's the truth.
Right.
You know, I look at you know, my children. No one annoys me on a daily basis and causes me more grief and more stress than my children. And yet there's no one on earth that I love and cherish and want to be around more than my children.
Right.
And that's quite the paradox, you know. And I think that we are children. We are God's children. And so, you know, the father is approaching us that same way. You know, we're annoying. We're an annoying group, and we have been since the garden. And yet that love is still there. It's still endless. And all we have to do is just be ready to reach out and grab it.
Right. And you see, you know, I wanted to have you on. What day is it, by the way, over there in Saipan? You're like July 10th, or where are you at?
It's Wednesday, July 6th. Here.
Okay, so you guys are 2 days after 4th of July. Did you guys do fireworks over there?
We didn't. My family didn't. I didn't see fireworks. I didn't see fireworks this year. We actually call it Liberation Day. No, I didn't see any fireworks. No fireworks this year.
So why? They just don't do that? It's not a tradition over there?
Oh no, they usually do, and you could buy fireworks anywhere here. I think it was either a shipment didn't come in. Sometimes we're down on shipments, but they just put out an incredible expense earlier this month for we hosted the Pacific Mini Games, which is kind of like the Olympics of Oceania. So we hosted I don't know 20 countries or something like that here. They had 9 different sports. They do it every 4 years, and then on the alternating 4 years, so 2 years and 2 years, they do the big Pacific Games. So we hosted it here, and it was a gigantic affair. So I think maybe they just ran out of funds to be able to do a big public fireworks display. We're also pretty far away, so we may have just missed it. I think we were all exhausted here. So
well, here in Florida, I mean, this year, I mean, it was the least amount of fireworks we've ever seen in our lives in many years, except for maybe the drought years when we had some problems with that. But it was interesting to me because I wanted to talk to you about this idea of like the hangover after 4th of July, so reflecting on ourselves as a nation. And it's like everybody is in a sour mood, you know, and you know, you got different municipalities saying we're not going to celebrate 4th of July. What's there to celebrate? And you see a lack of energy, a lack of charisma, a lack of confidence in the American people. And I thought, you know, you're on the edge of the American, domestic front here where you're at, and I'm here in Florida, which is considered to be the new capital of liberty in America. Yes. So we're kind of in interesting poles here in this empire, and it's a good time to reflect on what's going to happen next and where we're headed. What do you think? I mean, it's always a good time to reflect on anniversaries.
Yeah, I agree. You know, this is a very patriotic place. So this Commonwealth, as I understand it, I believe this is still the case, per capita has more veterans and people active military and reserve military than anywhere else, any state, any territory, anywhere. So you encounter especially the local people, the Chamorro and Carolinian people, and most of them are veterans. So I'd say like a majority, especially the men. It's a very patriotic place. You see American flags all over the place. They are very, very proud to be a part of the American experiment. The liberation of this island, the Japanese were quite horrible to the people. They were very, I mean, as people know, the Japanese were incredibly brutal to places that they colonized. And you know, the people here chose to be a part of the United States. They They have a covenant with the United States. They chose to be a part. And they receive a considerable amount of federal funding, grants, and just things dropped on them. A lot of the income here comes just directly from out of the federal treasury, even though we don't pay into it. So we don't pay into the IRS. It's a one-way street. So this is a place that really loves the United States. But again, it does give of its sons, right? So there is an expectation that you will. It's a client state. So just as in any client state in the empire, the expectation is we will pay for you. You will give us your sons to go to war. This is how it's been forever. And there's no difference here, right? But I will say that there has been, I think that there is not as much patriotism as there was even when I just got here 2 years ago. I think that and again, same sort of situation. You had not a lot of fireworks. We had not a lot of fireworks. So the pattern's going. There's a lot more. You're hearing a lot of the voices. I'm sure they've always been there, but there are a lot of voices that are much more around local control now. The voices that speak about, how it's not the United States and how we're in a covenant with the United States, but we're our own place. And that played out in these games that we recently had as well. It was, although there was American flags being carried, it was very clear that the country that these people were playing for was the Northern Marianas Islands. It wasn't the United States. Although we had Australia was here, and you know what I mean? We had other countries here, but it was not the American flag. It was the NMI flag. When people would win medals, they were draped in the NMI flag.
Interesting.
So
they've got a decentralist, localist spirit is starting to kick up over there for recent years, huh?
So the
which in some sense is honoring America in some way, right? It's almost like in order to honor America, you got to get rid of this nationalism, which is foreign to the best of the founders' ideas. I mean, if not that the founders had it all right, but I mean this idea of having a national civic religion that could bind together 330 million plus people. I mean, come on. I mean, how do you expect that myth to hold up over time?
Yeah, the civic religion, that's been key, hasn't it? I mean, that was part and parcel of the American experiment from the beginning. I think we've always been taught that there's been a separation of church and state, but that's really not accurate. There's been a church of the state, right? That's been absolutely the case. And certainly in my youth, I mean, I was born in 78. So growing up in the 80s, I mean, it was the end of the Cold War, right? It was as strong as ever in this country. It was the level of patriotism from the top down, all the messaging you got, born in the USA, proud to be an American, like all of it was just everybody. It was a foregone conclusion that was just what you were going to do. And that's been both, I think, the Cold War ended, space was there for that to be destroyed. It's been steadily dismantled, and it's been replaced by what I call the Church of Woke, which is the new civic religion.
Right. So that we're seeing a transition between an older civic government religion to a new government-sponsored official religion.
That's right.
And this new official religion kind of looks like it has a coalition of different victim cults, but it's still kind of a broader cultural narrative behind it all, which is interesting, right?
And I think if we look at it in that vein, what Florida actually represents then starts to make sense. Like the actions, for instance, that the governor is taking, with the getting the CRT out of the schools and all of that, which is their religious curriculum, by the way, right? So basically what he's doing is he's taking this religion's curriculum out and keeping in the old religion. So we really have a religious battle taking place, a battle of civic religions that's taking place. I don't think I've been talking about this for the last 2 years, that I've said this is a spiritual thing. This is a religious thing. I've coined this term, the Church of Woke, and I hear it used a lot more now. I think it's the only way to understand this, is to understand it in religious terms. And if we're seeing less of a celebration on the 4th of July,
That's the old religion. There's a new religion. It has a new celebrations.
Well, you should look at what was so heavily celebrated for the month before.
Right.
Pride month.
Yeah, all the energy sapped out of this one because there's a whole month that was just before it. And it has its own parades too, and parades are where you parade your conquered victims, like the Boy Scouts were paraded around. You know, these are institutions that we have. That's what they would do in Rome. They would come back and they'd say, "Hey, look, there's baboons. There's this spice. Look at all the things that we got while we were gone. Look at what we've done with all the loot we used from you guys. Look at all of our conquered nations." That's what these pride parades are. They parade different institutions and they say, look, we've got your GOP, we've got your Boy Scout, we've colonized every institution we need. How you like that? Let's get some more.
There were interesting, I thought that it was noteworthy that there were a whole bunch of pride parades on the weekend. So, July 4th was Monday. But on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there were a whole bunch of pride parades, even though it was now in July. So they had even scheduled these other religious parades to sort of preempt where it would be the old civic religious parade. And the flag is very important, of course, for colonization, right? It's all about which flag is flying.
Right.
And so, what flag has been flying. It is not at all about the individual issues. That's where people get caught up. It's not at all about critical race theory or an LGBT thing or any it's not about any of that. It's about a replacement of a religion and and power at the end of the day.
And both religions misappropriate and are scandalized and are jealous of the true religion, in my opinion, of Christianity, right? So the old civic religion is a little bit more, it's more friendly to Christianity on some level, but it still is it kind of brings in the metaphysical claims of Christianity and positions it within the framework of civic religion Americanism, right? You'll see those flags. Jesus is my savior and Trump's my president. And I kneel for the cross, but I stand for the pledge and I kneel for the cross. What? What's going on here? Liturgy.
Exactly.
Did you see that? And then you've got this new religion that's coming out. That's like down with all of that. We're throwing that over. It was hypocritical. It's disgusting. It's fake. It's dumb. It's not sophisticated. It doesn't have a good aesthetic. Here comes the revenge of the nerd civic religion that's going to replace the jocks religion. And that's what you see emerging here. And now the revenge of the nerds Christian religion, I always say it more effectively imitates the aesthetic of Christianity than the older civic religion. So the older civic religion positions the metaphysical claims of Christianity in a kind of transparent, hey, look, we kneel for the cross or whatever. And then the new civic religion doesn't do that. But it's the aesthetic. It's taking on the slain victim, the slain lamb that Revelation talks about. This idea that this I call it martyr's energy. They covet the perch, the martyr's perch of Christ, and they want to kind of basically parade a pantheon of victims that have been deified in the same way that Jesus, or trying to, in the same way that Jesus is recognized as God, right? So how
they have the mysticism. They have the Church of Woke has the mysticism. This is what's lacking from the American civic religion, which should be lacking from the American civic religion since it's a product of the Enlightenment, the height of the Enlightenment, right? So 1776 is like mysticism out the door. I mean, we're on just the last legs of the alchemists, right? The last legs. I mean, Jefferson was an alchemist. So this is the final piece. And even there, we're getting into a rationalism that's going to lead us into scientism at that point. So we've got the civic religion that grows up in the intellectual, rationalist, materialist milieu. And, you get 150 years into that and something's lacking. You had the mysticism and the mythology, like I say, in the 80s because there was an enemy. And so at the very least, we didn't get gods, but at least we got heroes, right? Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all those characters that they played, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and all this, and they're going up against the Russians and they're doing all of this, and then they would go against the terrorists, and it's like they tried to milk it for a while, and now there's just no more enemies. Right? We're in globalism. There's no other at this point. And
that's what I've said. I've said that for years, that there's this weird connection between the rise of wokeism and the collapse of the American foreign policy adventurism. They go hand in hand. Like it's like our violence, it became so impotent and so untethered to any kind of cathartic release that violence started to rip apart the very sense of identity of Americans back here at home, whether it's the psychotic school shooting events or undifferentiation, attacks on boundaries between child and adult. We're losing our mind because we have all this imperial aggression that can't be discharged into a credible common enemy abroad, right? So it's now falling in on itself here at home, right?
Well, that is the Leo Strauss thesis, right? That's the thesis upon which neoconservatism is built, that you have to have the other, you have to have the great enemy and the great narrative. You must have those things. It's not wrong. The problem is that it's a poor prescription, because then what you get in terms of foreign policy is always looking for that. Well, they found it, or at least they thought they had found it again in Russia, right? It's not turning out quite right. Let's just put it like that. There's too much at stake, and we're too interconnected. Right. And I think that what the wokes have done is they've got the mysticism, and part of the reason why they have the mysticism is because they have the artists.
Right.
And this is something that certainly Orthodox Christianity, but Roman Catholicism as well, has been able to leverage the artistic aesthetic, beauty, right? And in music, in visual, and the American civic religion was really, really bad at that. Laughably bad at that. And Hollywood had it for a little bit, but it still is. There was a level of camp and absurdity to it. It's not earnest, but in Christianity, it's earnest,
right?
And the wokes are earnest. It's not cynical. It's not a joke to them. Like they're earnest about the aesthetics of it. When you have that, and then they've basically democratized the enemy. So they've individualized it, they've democratized it to where, there's a singular enemy that's out there, but it's a mystical enemy. It's not like this country over here where we can point and they're bad and they're the other, this tribe over here. It's like racism, you know what I mean? Writ large, and it could just pop in at any time. So we're in powers and principalities at that point. So they're very, in structure, it's got all the things that Christianity has, and which is why, calling it Antichrist is probably not completely off.
Right. I mean, Rene Girard called it Antichrist, the super Christianity, victimism, returning neo-paganism through the veneer of victim concern, and trying to outcompete in a mimetic rivalry with the body of Christ, a new kind of universal body of victims. And that's why they feel the need to make their in a Kabul embassy, they have to paint murals of George Floyd. And I always find that so weird, how it's like you're actively colonizing and occupying these people of color, and you're putting on your domestic victim of a person of color, and you're like, hey, look at what we did.
Yes.
What are you trying to communicate there when you send drones the next day to kill people of color in the name of a nation identity that's all about self-flagellating about killing the other, right? So you're killing the other, and you're telling the other, don't be like us while we kill our own local others, and now we're going to kill you, but it's okay because we're doing it to defend women and transgender people in Afghanistan. So therefore it gives us a pass. As long as we do it in the name of some other, we can otherize you in the name of defending another other. It's just an endless search for the hidden victim, right?
Well, this is the it's mysticism taken too far. This is falling off the left. So this is the royal path, that you can go from mysticism to, you got to have the mystic and the rational. And Christianity, certainly Orthodoxy, is like, you have to have both. Like, you must be rational and you must have a mystical appreciation, both in your practice. That's what it's meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're hyper rational materialist, right? Because as humans, we are a soul and a body. It's not what we have, it's what we are. We are a soul and a body. And so it's like the material, the spiritual. You can fall way too far off the left. And it's like what they're saying is there is no material. And this is when you get into the situation where, what is a woman? You know, of asking, can you define woman for me? Mm-hmm. And it's like, the person's like, oh, I can't. Well, you're gone. Like, you're so far in the mystical realm right now, because I'm asking you a material question. Right? I'm asking you a material question that it's like an adult female human. It's very, very easy. You know, this is an objective material. This is what the word means. Mm-hmm. When you've taken it that far, like, okay, you've fallen off the left. But on the other side, there is to acknowledge that, okay, yes, adult female human, but see, it still is not that easy, because there is a societal role for a woman. There is a spiritual role for a woman. Like, the mother of God is a woman.
That's what they call that. They try to explain that with intersectionality, the different intersections of your identity, all being infinite, you know? Right.
But the thing is that they're not infinite. They're not infinite. I mean, they are bounded. They're bounded. You know what I mean? They're bounded in a way. Yes, your spirit has a piece of the infinite, but still, in order to operate in the framework of your soul and your body, there have to be some bounds. You can't just say, I'm not a human. I don't have a soul and a body.
Right.
Without, so it's not so many limitations that you are not able to have the fullness of the experience, which would be to the right, too many limitations, and not so few limitations that nothing makes sense and there is no meaning. That's to the left, somewhere in between. And the answer to that is Christ.
And you got the first revolution of America, this revolutionary faith, and its error is kind of a dualism, like a Cartesian dualism, mind and body, and not make a hard delineation. I think Christianity sees those things as more interconnected. Mm-hmm. And so they try to reason their way out of the passions of man by binding it together with a reasonable social contract that somehow that government would self-police itself through the ages. And, it's kind of, I don't think this is kind of a patchwork, but you made it seem really clever and neat at the time. And, of course, they had a coup after the Articles of Confederation. And so they're already seeing the passions of man start to mystically unbound the Constitution's chains on them already. So, but then we've got this new revolution that's kind of like, again, it's a super Christian revolt against the hypocrisies of the first founding myth by saying, now it's 1619. Now you're going to see the story from the victim's perspective. It kind of reminded me of that Joker movie where it's like, you've seen Batman. Now you get to see the scapegoat. You get to see the victim. Or the Bible would say, you've seen it from, Cain's perspective. Now let's hear where Abel's voice is, right? Where the Bible stays on the camera goes to Abel and says, God's listening to his cries. Yes. It doesn't go and look at Cain's narrative and say, what a lovely city you've built, Cain. You're a strong man. You'll be a great leader someday. No, it's like, no, I'm concerned about that guy over there that you killed before you created your city. And that kind of thing is being echoed here when you have movies like Joker. And I know that sounds trivial, but it's not, because that's pop culture. Batman's like a pop culture little hero god of the post-World War II era. And now our culture's like, hey, we deified him, but look at who he actually, look at his victim. He's going through mental trauma. He's got problems with his mom. He's got problems of being abused and so forth. Let's hear his side, right? So let's elevate the victims and let's turn the dial up on their volume. And but the problem they make is they don't want to have any redemption for the so-called oppressors in these dynamics, right?
That's ultimately the issue, is that when we tell these stories, these stories are their frameworks and their examples. It's not just it's not just entertainment. Our entire being as social creatures, stories are our instruction manual for being, for living. That's how human beings operate. We have to view our existence through story in order to have meaning. Right? Like there has to be a narrative. There has to be a narrative thread. And there's a way that narrative needs to be structured, and it needs to resolve. It needs to resolve, and it needs to resolve for all of the individuals who we might potentially embody. Right? And this is something, if we go back again to talk about like the 80s movies, well, you don't do development on the villain. If we want to call them, they would be like the victim now. You don't do character development on this person. And the reason why you don't do character development on them is because they're not part of we're not giving instructions for how to be them. Right. But what we've got starting with, Heath Ledger's Joker, if we're going to develop them out, then you're going to end up with Joaquin Phoenix, where it's just about him. Okay. And now what are we doing? Now we're saying, here's how you be the Joker. It's not the Joker is a foil to this character that we're saying that you should be. It's how do you be the Joker? And I think that this is a post-structuralist, postmodernist, perhaps, but it's like at a certain point, the storyteller has a responsibility. That's something that's been heavily, heavily lost,
But I have to give credit though. I'm gonna give it some props.
Please.
Because in some sense, Jesus is kind of doing that in the story that Paul tells about him. He said, that Paul encounters Jesus on the road to go and persecute his Joker, his monsters, his misfits that are upending the structure of his reality and his order.
Yes.
And he's trying to do it in the name of that good old time religion of his. So he's the conservative, so to speak, and he's trying to put down this uprising. And that's where Jesus meets him. And he's telling the story, and he quotes Jesus, who's basically, from what I understand, quoting Dionysus from the Bacchae, where he says, it is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And this is like this line that the Greek culture at the time would have understood, this Bacchae play of Dionysus when King Pentheus has him on trial, just like, and he says, he's basically saying, like, you think you've got me on trial, but I'm the God here. And, you can't escape my grasp. I'm the one in real power. And of course, the story of King Pentheus and Dionysus in Bacchae ends that Dionysus is this dangerous god of the crowd that even the Greeks understood. You don't want to make Dionysus look too good. Right. We want to humanize Dionysus. Dionysus is kind of a, bad god there. You want to keep him at bay, because that if you let Dionysian cults get out of control, you're going to have undifferentiated chaos.
Yes.
But it's interesting that here's the point, that Paul takes this untouchable God and he puts it into the mouth of Jesus's quote. Saying it's hard for thee to kick against the pricks is kind of like quoting, like, I'll be back for Terminator for our culture. So, okay, you're saying that line. And so he's humanizing the victim, the hidden victim of Dionysus as a figure. He's redeeming that hidden violence that God psychologically stands in for the Greek culture. And he's saying, like, in that, I'm not going to tear down your Dionysus. I'm going to redeem the hidden victims that he stood in for. And I'm going to break it from within, because he redeems it by saying, it's hard for thee to kick against the pricks, meaning, Paul, I'm not going to tear you apart like Dionysus's cult members do to King Pentheus. I'm the king. You're putting me on trial by killing members of my body, but I'm not going to end this story by me tearing you apart. I've allowed myself to be torn apart so that you could have forgiveness, endless forgiveness, and you can't escape that calling that I've put on your life of love, to not kill anybody, not to tear Stephen's body apart, but to stop tearing people's bodies apart. So it's the healing of the Dionysian cult that you see from Jesus. So you can see that faint echo when they take a Joker character and say, look at the redeeming qualities of it. They're in Jesus's playground and they can't escape. You know, that's what they can't understand. You know?
Well,
they're in
it's a good point. I think it's a very good point. And it's, you know, looking at it as, and this is one of the reasons why, you know, I hadn't understood it for a while. It took a while for me to understand why Father Turbo and other, you know, other priests that I had spoken with and other fathers who, you know, I had listened to had said, it's important to not leapfrog saints. It's important to, as you're going to study the tradition, to start studying the tradition with the most recent saints. So modern saints, read modern saints, Saint Sophrony, Saint Nikolai Velimirovich. Like, read these modern saints who are speaking in a modern language, who are receiving from the Holy Spirit in a way that Saint Paisios, in a way that that can be communicated to a modern ear. And I think that, you know, the first thing that we have to remember is that Christ is speaking to Paul.
Yeah.
Right. So he's going to speak to Paul in a language that Paul understands. Yeah. Right. Just like he's going to speak to any of us in prayer in a language that we understand, in the symbols, in the meaning that we have. Right. So it's subjective in that way. Right. The principle is not subjective, but the message that comes has to be subjective. Right. It has to be in language and symbols that we understand. And so if we
Paul's
look at
talking to the Greek culture,
yes,
so they're wanting to know, what are you all about? Who is this God? What are you doing? What do you do? What is this all about? And he's trying to relate to them where they're at too.
Well, and he is where they're at, right? So I mean, he's one of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's his role. That's why I mean, besides that it's the truth, but that's why his message is able to carry so far, is because he's speaking to a Greek speaking culture. Mm-hmm. Right.
And he's also making a brotherhood claim in some sense, because he's as a Jew.
Yes.
Greek speaking Jew. He's basically saying, like, my religion, you think it like distinguished from your religion, but it's actually, we're in the same boat here as it relates to the persecution of the body of Christ and continuing that Dionysian cycle of tearing apart the crowd, you know, the crowd tearing apart its victims.
And there's also, you know, making the counterpoint there of basically, it's not necessarily that it redeems Dionysus per se, but it's that it shows that there are spiritual principles that can be found in any faith and in any story that carries, but that they are all lacking compared to the truth, right? So they can have little pieces of the truth. And I think that we all experience this in our lives when we have a little knowledge of something, and then we run across some resource or some person who has really a lot of knowledge, and they're like, and we say, oh, this, and they're like, no, it's actually like this. And then all of a sudden we understand, I had like 30% of it, but the 70% where I had filled in the blanks was completely missing the mark. It had basically invalidated the 30% that I had. But now that I've replaced that with something good, that 70%, whoa, it's like now the 30% actually has meaning. Right. And so this seems to be a constant pattern, because I will say that, you know, I have, as Father Turbo does, and it's probably why we you know, had a connection to each other immediately. But like, my background, you know, falling out of the church, I had a long-standing relationship with the occult, with plant medicine, with all of these things, and it's very much the same thing. You know, I was very public, as a matter of fact, about my long-standing relationship with ayahuasca and what I had experienced there, and that was my first experience of a real, no doubt, independent spirit, where I was, and as you know, millions of people have experienced this at this point, right? And so gaining, it's
interesting. Mike Cernovich has recently been moving towards Orthodoxy after having a demon. He said recently encountering a demon in an ayahuasca experience. Yep. So that's interesting. That's the ayahuasca to Orthodoxy pipeline I didn't really know about until you.
I think I think there is one, because
When's Rogan going to have his prayer beads on? Oh my goodness, huh? He's on. Is he next? He's done ayahuasca enough.
He could, you know, I think he's probably gone so far down the occult rabbit hole at this point that it would be hard for him to pull back, because he would have to change so much in his life.
Right.
If something were to happen that required a shift, and some sort of an illness, some tragedy, that made him have to reevaluate, then maybe. He's done pretty good over the last 2 years. He's one of the people out there who's like had way more success over the last 2 years. Yeah, it's the thing with the ayahuasca to orthodoxy pipeline. It's a real deal. The psychedelic to orthodoxy pipeline is a real deal, and the reason why is because psychedelics, people who have serious experience with it understand that there is a spiritual realm. They understand that there are other entities that are out there, and orthodoxy has been accounting for that fact and recognizing that fact for 2,000 years. Like it's a core piece of the tradition. And so it not only acknowledges your experience, it recognizes it, and then it explains it to where you're like, oh yeah, that's actually what's going on. These guys who are writing this have had this experience, but they've had it without the chemicals. And that's when it's like, whoa, this is somebody who's been there. It's like somebody, you read the fathers talking about the spiritual realm, and it's like somebody who's been in your house, in your room, describing your room to you. And at that point, you've got to take notice and be like, wait a minute.
Things they've seen in the spiritual realm?
Yes.
Like colors
and
or something?
Experience. Not just colors, but the nature of it, right? The nature of the communication with one of these beings. And when you have a situation like that, and you're like, this person has been to the same place I have been, but then theirs is so much more full than yours. Yours is like you just popped in. Theirs is like they were living there, for years and years and years. So it's actually their house. And then you realize, oh no, I thought I lived there. I was the visitor. This is how to live there.
You're saying that these, just to clarify, you're saying these psychedelic experiences give you access to good beings that the church fathers are experiencing through meditation, or what are you saying specifically?
Oh, no. They actually give you, they're actually putting you in touch mostly with the demonic, to be honest.
But how are the church fathers describing the same thing then? I'm just trying to understand.
Because they're talking about the demonic constantly.
Oh, that they are being harassed by the demonic themselves? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, harassed, tempted.
Right. Okay.
There's way more in terms of saints writing about their experiences with demons than there is with angels.
Okay, I see.
Because any saint, part of the experience of a saint, especially an ascetic, right, especially a hermit, they're going to be dealing with demons constantly. They're under attack 24 hours a day. Like pretty much the entire thing that an ascetic is doing is dealing with the demonic as they're attacked. Like it's that's what makes it hard, right? You read about Saint Anthony the Great, and he's having a full-on battle with the devil on a daily basis, with Satan himself.
So when people do these ayahuasca things, they're being confronted sometimes with their sins in a similar way that demons are persecuting the saints, but about their temptations and fleshly desires, right? Is that what
No, you're being confronted by beings. I'm not making them. This is not, and that's why I say that there's the pipeline. Is because with ayahuasca, there is no doubt it's not a metaphor. Like there's no way to rationalize the experience. There is a being.
Okay.
And the beings that you are encountering are the same beings that everyone else is encountering.
Is that so spirit, the mother of the spirit or something like that?
When you encounter Mother Ayahuasca, everybody encounters the same spirit. It doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman.
And she's just like a witch spirit or something, or what is this? A demon?
I mean, she's a plant spirit, right? So I think that's, I would be classified as a demon, but it's a different type of demon than, let's say, that the demons that are like archdemons. So it's less that she's, let's say, necessarily a hater of mankind and trying to see mankind be destroyed. It's more that she's got her, at least as I have come to understand it, it's more that she has her own designs. And to her, you're a tool to be used at best, right? It's less, it's more, you know, it's more the way that you would view like cattle or something like that, right? That she's like, okay, here's a spirit, and all she wants to do is spread. So this is a, you know, plant spirit, right? And she's a vine, so she wants to curl around you.
Oil sludge that people were eating.
Could be. could be. I mean, there's
her design. Oh my goodness.
I don't know. I mean, what I got from her from the beginning was her saying that she wanted to spread. Like that's what she would communicate. And she communicates that to everyone. And everyone experiences her as like a grandmotherly, but highly feminine and often sexually charged being.
Does she show up in some of these church father writings you're referring to?
No, I mean, this is a particular spirit, right? And so
it's only in that region of the world, that the jungle area, or
it's only encountered. I mean, she's probably around, but I think the brew magnifies it. Although, you know, when they asked the shamans, how did you learn to brew this? Because the brew is very specific. The ayahuasca is actually not the psychoactive thing. The ayahuasca is a vine. There's other plants that are psychoactive that have the DMT in them. The main one that they would use is called chacruna, and it's a shrub. If you just eat chacruna by itself, nothing happens. You actually have to use the ayahuasca and cook it in a very specific way, because ayahuasca is an MAOI inhibitor, actually, like Prozac. And it's the combination of the two that allows you to have the experience. If you just do ayahuasca by itself, brew it up, nothing. Just the chacruna, nothing. You have to mix them, and it's a long, arduous process. It takes like multiple, like at least hours, if not days, to cook this brew. So they asked the shamans, how did someone even learn to take these two random plants and combine them and cook them and have this experience? And they said, the spirit of ayahuasca told us, right? So there's some notion in their tradition that the spirit of ayahuasca can be accessed without this, and that perhaps some shaman was doing something at some point to access this spirit without this, but that she then said, here's how you can do this to let everybody access me. And this really, again, when you're talking about spiritual principles, you know, there is the Orthodox idea of in prayer to ask the Holy Spirit to teach you how to pray. So pray to the Holy Spirit. So teach me to pray in me, you know, is a prayer.
Yeah.
So to actually pray to the Holy Spirit to teach you how to pray.
Yeah.
And so there you go. All of these places apart, right? To be like, no, the spirits are there. It's just very difficult without some program, whether that's pharmacological, whether that's prayer, whether that's liturgy, whether that's song, whatever it is. It's very difficult to access these spirits without some ritual.
Yeah. And how does the Great Reset and the vaccine for 6-month-old babies and all this stuff, how does this fit into this spirit of wokeism? How do you see it fitting into this? Because what's interesting, you know, that this, you're saying it's like an era of the left wokeism, but, and it's true, but at the same time, it has this rather kind of traditionally conservative impulse of disgust about diseases. Ooh, you know, usually if you're leftist, you don't mind being, I mean, that's why they call them barefoot and granola crunchy. You know, they're out there with earthworms and stuff, and they're doing the ayahuasca thing, which is more of a traditional hippie liberal thing that, but now that same left is super creeped out about germs and masks and smiles and trusting it, their own immune system can't be trusted. So what's going on with that? How does that fit in with the wokeism pantheon of you know, victim gods? Or
you know, I don't think it's about disgust, to be honest with you. I really don't. I don't think that the wokes actually have a strong disgust against pathogens. From the beginning, I've said that all of these things. So again, if we look at it as religious, right? if you're going to have a religion, you're going to have some garb that identifies you as being part of that religion.
Mm-hmm.
And the mask serves that purpose perfectly.
But
and
now
we've
it's
seen
gone.
it.
Most of them have
well, it'll be
it.
back. It'll be back. Right. And they're not going to need the mask because now they've got the passport.
Yeah.
Which will be introduced this fall en masse. Right. They're already gearing up, now. But the shot, the woke poke, as I call it, is a baptism. That it's their baptism.
Yeah.
And that's why we've moved now to infant baptism, haven't we?
Yeah.
When you view it as what it actually is, a religion.
It's like an initiation rite. I'm willing to trust the gods of these scientisms so much that I'll put my baby's skin in the game and offer it up as a risk. Please don't kill it. Oh, please don't kill it. You didn't kill it. It's almost like the risk is built into the feature of it, not a bug, right?
Well, it's the Hunger Games
like that,
It's the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
It's drawing lots for child sacrifice.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's what it is.
And that's why they want to ignore people who get a report of a vaccine injury, because they're like, well, the gods don't love you. That's why you got injured, and you need to be moved away and vanquished out of society, because it's like something's not right with you if the gods have decided to allow you to have some kind of alleged injury from this blessed shot, right, of health.
When you see it that way and understand it that way, it makes perfect sense. Everything makes sense. Then you're like, because, this has been the problem. This was my problem for the last 2 years, and why I really started speaking up about these issues was, I would, and in the beginning, I was making fun of people for charts and graphs, and I said, listen, this is the dim age. I said, this is what we're moving into, is a time of mysticism. You've got to understand this in the mystical religious vein that this is.
Exactly, yeah.
Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. Because otherwise, how do you rationalize? Why are we giving and soon to mandate a shot, a medication for a demographic that has no risk? Like, for whom this is not deadly? And people will get caught up and say, well, there's no risk. But you've missed the mark already, because you're under the impression that this has anything to do with the disease.
Right.
It doesn't. It's a baptism.
Right.
It's a baptism. If it wasn't this, it would be something. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah.
An initiation.
That's that's abortion too. Abortion was an old classic rite of passage, which is like, I'm willing to commit myself to the dream of egalitarianism and sameness and rivalry and supplanting of men in every corner of reality. And I'm willing to be a part of this collective project, even to the point of the anguish of killing my own child. And saying, I'm willing to put that skin in the game, to say, look, I am totally committed to being a liberated woman from this collective spirit of liberation that's promised to them if they would only show their commitment. That's why so many of them are doubling down on that by saying, I'm having a party about my 10th abortion. It's like, look at me. I'm so committed to this religion that I'm willing to do this horrific thing to my own children and myself for 10 times. I mean,
and if we look at it in the mythological, right, or the mythopoetic, even, it is the perfect anti to what is the traditional female initiation, which is childbirth. This is the reason why in many cultures, only the men have a rite of passage, a formal rite of passage, because the assumption is that the woman is going to have her rite of passage.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
She's going to go, because the rite of passage is always about death and rebirth. It's always about facing of death, going into the underworld, right? Encountering, and then coming back reborn, new name, the whole nine, right? Well, when you've got infant mortality high, as it has been throughout our history, and then like maternal deaths, right? So mothers dying in childbirth, we don't experience it in our age right now, but that was just a normal occurrence. I mean, even for our not so long ago, few centuries ago ancestors, totally normal. Like, if you made it through 5 or 6 children, that's great. It was not uncommon for a woman to die on her first go, right? So like, you are face to face with both death and life at that moment. That's an initiation. that is the initiation. Like that is the pattern of initiation. But since men don't go through that, then we have to have it. But that's also what a Christian baptism is, right? That's what a full immersion baptism is like down into the underworld, down into the tomb, down into death, right? To be reborn. And then with a new name even.
Similar to the gender ritual for children, right? Giving them a new name, dead naming. Don't remind me that I used to be Saul.
Naming.
I used to be Saul, now I'm Paul, you know, or whatever.
That's it.
Selena.
Well,
I was Saul, now I'm Selena.
It is I mean, it's interesting that you say that. I had not really thought about that, but that's how it's being used by young women in particular, right? This thing of the gender, the transgender thing, this is a young girl thing for the most part. And it is young girls who having children is not, it's been said it's not what you're going to do.
It's truly satanic because it's some kind of spirit of the age that's telling young children, mutilate your breasts so you can't give life-giving, you know, milk to your children, and mutilate your genitalia. Cut your connection off with your body completely. What a horrific thing, you know, it's just so horrific. It reminds me, I don't know why this visual pops up, but in Egypt, we were looking at some of these temples and they had the pictures of the hieroglyphics, and some of them, they were scraped up all over their face and stuff. And that was some of the early Christians or whatever, they'd come in and scratch up these depictions of gods. And it's similar to that, like these, like this marring of genitalia, like scratching it off, you know, like that's creepy when you think about this collective spirit that's possessing these so-called institutions of influence. There we go again, back to influencers. And they're telling you, cut yourself off from life. Cut yourself off from life.
Literally.
Cut yourself off.
Literal
life,
cut.
You know?
I think that's when viewed in the mythological, when viewed from that standpoint, all of these things make perfect sense.
And the mythological always had a gender bender priest.
Always.
That was a sign of undifferentiated chaos. And now the difference is what we call neo-paganism, is that rather than that chaos being within the androgynous priest controlled sacrificial ritual in the festival, now we have made it the normative for how every day will be a festival. Every day is a carnival. Every day is this upending of order. And that's where we're at. So how do you bring it back to order? Because I mean, I know I'm cheesy like that, but I'm always like, I don't like leaving it. I always like to give my audience some little things to anchor themselves and give them a little bit of homework and focus. But where do you see, how do you give, I don't like the defeatist mindset that a lot of Christians have of like the Benedict option of just, I see something there, but I don't like this idea of just hide and lock the door and hope they don't come for you. I don't think
neither
that's
do
a
I.
good mindset,
Neither do I.
So.
No. Well, the answer is Christ. But I think if you would have said that to me 2 years ago, 3 years, let's say 3. If you would have said that to me 3 years ago, right? I would have brushed it off. I would have said, this is pablum, right? I would have said, this is just, what is this, a bumper sticker? What are we doing? We're at the Harvest Festival right now. You're going to bring out a praise and worship band? Like, what's going on, right? Yeah. But having an understanding of Orthodoxy and understanding what that actually means in terms of the answer is Christ. Because what the answer is an orientation.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is, what are you looking at and what are you moving toward? Most people are unmoored. And we know that they're unmoored because all of these things couldn't have taken hold if they had some mooring, if they were looking at something and moving in a direction. And we want to, by our nature, talk about Rene Girard, bring it full circle, right? We can't help but to be oriented at an example, a role model.
Right.
We can't help it. It's in our nature. What we can help is when we become conscious, we can decide what to point at. as a role model, right? That's it. And Christ is the ultimate in that regard. And then the thing is to have a personal, this goes back, this is where the mystical comes in, because it's one thing to say that rationally, which would be like a Protestant view. It's one thing to say that rationally and to lay out a course of action, right? Okay, you're going to live your life this way. You're going to do this and this and this and this and this. And I think some people could look at the Orthodox and they could say, well, but you're doing that. What's up with your Wednesday and Friday fast? We're in another fast right now, even after Lent, right? We're in the Apostles' fast. So it's like, what about you with all your fasting and your rituals and all of these things? Okay, well, this is where the royal path comes in, is that the purpose of this is to have, and it also goes to the ayahuasca thing, right? That it's like, yes, Christ is available, but there's 2,000 years of people who have been seeking Christ, who have put together a formula for how do you get yourself closer to that spirit, the Holy Spirit? How do you see that orientation and allow yourself to be informed so that you could discern, which way am I supposed to go right now in my life? I have this decision. What should I be looking at? Where should I be moving toward? That's what it's really all about. It's, here's a spirit. The spirit will guide you, but you have to be oriented toward it. And it's a mystical spirit. It is a real relationship with a real entity. And an understanding that there are real entities out there that are trying to pull you away from that. There are real entities out there. You say the spirit of the age, right? It's a real spirit. Okay, it's the prince of this world. It's described over, especially by Paul. By St. Paul over and over is talking about the ruler of this world, the prince of this world, the rulers of the darkness of this world, the rulers of this age, which world and age are the same, right? It's the same word translated. So over and over and over again, it's not like a metaphor for some collective consciousness. It's an actual spirit. It's an actual conscious, when you view it as an actual conscious being, there are actual conscious beings that wants little girls to chop off their breasts and that are speaking to them in their ears at night, and that are speaking to them through their phones, and that are speaking to them through their friends, and over and over and over are telling them, cut yourself off, just like you said. It's a real entity. And you understand that when on the other side, you realize, well, there's a real entity that loves you, that really wants you to be guided. And that the way to access that entity is you're going to need to do the things. You're going to need to do the rituals to access that entity, the same way that you'll need to do the ritual to access ayahuasca, right? The same way. So that's the answer. That's difficult for a lot of people because they don't come from a mystical. We're in the West, mysticism has died, right? It's died. But I think it's the positive of the last 2 years is that if you really look, you can see like there's something way bigger at play here. There are bigger powers at play.
It's almost like a fideism or something like this, like Gnosticism, because there's a hatred of the body, a hatred of your immune system, your limitations as a corporeal being, everything's digital, got to do a metaverse, don't have kids, don't trust your ability to recover from diseases, all this stuff. Don't even eat real food. You have to eat fake food and seed oil sludge instead of butter like grandma. All this hatred of the natural material world, that's the direction we're headed. So it's in keeping with what you said there about like a dim age. But I do think that, like, for example, this idea of like imitating Christ as his body, I think when you look at things like signs and wonders, like I think maybe I'm off on this, but I've come to believe that I think that means that we Christians should perform signs and wonders in various levels. But one of those things means to be meeting the material need that the masses have for dealing with disease and poverty and pollution, but doing it in a way through nonviolent, voluntary market actions or whatever that outcompete the satanic inversion of it, because the state in its spirits and its crony industrial complexes all around it, they can get the masses to follow them because they promise signs and wonders. You come to us, we'll save the world from pollution and disaster. You come to us, we'll heal you from cancer. We come to us, we'll save you from infectious diseases. So if Christians would get up there in the public square and say, actually, no, we cured cancer. You don't need, it doesn't, we actually did it. And we did it in the name of Jesus Christ. Or, hey, we actually created anti-gravity technology in the name of Jesus Christ. That sounds stupid, but we live in such a insecure age that we don't have the confidence to even say that without feeling like I'm what's wrong with you? We don't do anti-gravity. We don't do cures for cancer. We don't do elemental transmutation in the name of Jesus of all people. He's the opposite of scientific advancement. That's how far we've fallen into their sunken space, like to be a Christian, that doesn't have anything to do with me making nuclear energy too cheap to meter. That's kind of over there. And that's I got to keep my religion kind of embarrassingly away from that side of me. And it's like, no, the only way we can do those things to get the people to pay attention to Christ is you have to have the confidence to be Christ and to perform, because that's what he did. He was healing people. He was healing people of material need. They were hungry. He fed them. He was healing them of their social outcast status. He was bringing them into relationship with their community. And he was healing people from serious diseases that were a real problem. Why don't we do the same? Why is that so? Why do I have to say this on an obscure podcast? Why isn't this preached by every church known to man? I mean, in the gospel, this is what we should be doing every Sunday. Hey, what do you do? Can you do cold fusion? Hey, can you do Bitcoin? Hey, what are you doing with your nutritional disease problem solutions for heart disease? Why don't we have that attitude? Why do we have such a weak, low energy spirit?
Well, it is preached in every Orthodox church, and it's part of the Orthodox tradition. So, I mean, down to icons doing wonders. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, every day, I mean, today there's icons. I mean, I was looking at what saints we commemorate and which icons are there, and there's wonder working from all of them. The one important thing is that I would just add as maybe a little bit of a clarification that would be sort of the Orthodox understanding of it is we can't do wonders. As human beings, we can't do them. We can't heal. We can't levitate somebody. I mean, you name it. There's been so many wonders that have been done that are part of the Orthodox tradition. You can go and read the saints of the day and you'll find them every single day, right? And every saint will say, it is not me doing this. If you are healed, it is Christ that healed you. The same person who healed the multitudes when they came to him, right? So it's not, he's never stopped healing. And that it's just that, again, having a saint and a closeness to the Spirit heals, right? So an icon that's a holy icon, it's an icon, right? It's an inanimate object, but it's healing people. A relic, right? It's healing people. Why? Because it's close to the Spirit and the Spirit heals. The individual saints, right? The saints basically become an icon. So they're filled with the Spirit, and it's their proximity to the Spirit that heals. It's their proximity to the Spirit that allows the wonders to take place, right? And it's also their proximity to the Spirit that gives them the discernment and the vision of what they should be doing, prophetic word for them to be able to speak prophecy. It's, we say it's the Holy Spirit that in the Nicene Creed, in discussing the Holy Spirit, it says, who spake by the prophets, right? The Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, who with the Father and the Son together is worshiped and glorified, who spake by the prophets. The prophets don't speak. The Holy Spirit speaks. So again, it goes back to what's the solution, right? So to answer your question of how do we get to that point where we are doing those things? If you want to do those things, you need to be in proximity to the Spirit. You can't, there's no way to do those things outside of your proximity to the Spirit. So what does that mean? You got to start now, right? You want to do those things? That means you need to become a saint. And what does that mean? That means it's not, that's going to be very hard, right? But what I can guarantee is that if you will even try to approach it, your impact on the world will be exponentially more positive in all of the ways that you're discussing. And you will lead people to those things. Like you will lead people to healing of mind, body, and soul. Right. But it's like, that's And also, I think, just one additional note, and this is a royal path thing, and this is something that also was mind blowing to me, is this idea that, when we try to fight evils, even fight off temptation. So there's this great example that it's like, this guy's got a problem with lust, and he knows that he has this problem with lust. And like, he's young guy on Tinder or whatever, and he's used to like swiping and going and fornicating with whatever type of women, right? And he's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. And he's like, okay, I'm off that. No, I'm going to be like dedicated. I'm going to just work and do my thing and not do that and not get into these relationships. And then some woman calls him and like booty calls him, right? And it's like, hey, I'm here, come over, sending him nude pictures or whatever. And he like deletes it, shuts off his phone. And he's like, okay, I beat lust. Right. And he's like, I beat lust. He's like, yes, good for me. And right then pride got him. Right then he's in a worse sin than the one he was in before. Now he's got pride, which is even more deadly. Right. And so the only way for us to be able to approach this in a way where we don't have that, where we jump from, oh, this sin of inaction and sloth. Oh, but now I'm doing action, and now I'm feeding the homeless, and now I'm doing nuclear fusion, and now I'm doing all of these things. And isn't that great? And look, everybody, look. And as human beings, pride and vainglory, we're going to fall into it. Right. I think
that is the tendency of conservative reactions to the left's grossness, is to do that kind of stuff, to be like, like, oh, you guys want to embrace obesity as a standard of beauty. Well, we're going to talk about how, disgusting. That's kind of, there's a pride to that, right? Kind of pride of being better. Than that. Or,
and pride
leftist
is worse.
Women are very unattractive. You'll hear that a lot on the right and stuff like that. That's prideful arrogance. That's not a spirit of victory. That's a spirit of losers.
And so how do we? So then the question is like, well, then what do we do? Mm-hmm. Right?
We're not reacting to the left. What else do we have to do? That's all we do.
What else do we got? Pray.
Yeah.
Pray.
Yeah.
Find Christ, like the real spirit. Find him, because he's waiting. And like the answers are there. And the thing is, historically, that's where the answers have been for Western culture. Like, this is the place that when things are falling apart that we go back to. And it's only because we get restored and we get saved that we're able to, that it falls off again, right? That we fall back into decadence and we fall back into all of this, and then we have to find him again. The prodigal son.
So you've been coming home to Christ for 2 years, you said, right? Almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you want to be professionally, media? Where do you visualize yourself? Do you have any benchmark that far out?
I want to continue the work that I am doing on trying to get closer to Christ, and in that way, following through on my repentance. I've had quite a life. Right. And it's to be able to flip the things that I have learned and the things that drug me down in my life, to be able to be saved. And in as much as I have the little that I've been able to do in the short time that I've been, in repentance in the way that I have been, those that I love are better off for it. I know that. My relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children is one of that's very, very different. And those that I'm responsible to, those that I interact with. And so, God's will be done on those things. I pray and I listen and I'm guided. And that's it. To continue struggling, I think is
so in other words, you're hoping to crack 1 million followers in 5 years on Twitter, right? But anyways, so, I wanted to, let's see, you said something earlier. Okay. So you said you describe yourself as a prodigal son, right?
Yeah, sure.
What would you say to people who are listening to you and your message, and they're saying, okay, you got your church that's helping you, you did your prodigal son thing. Okay. Well, I feel like the other brother. I didn't get to go to Hollywood. I didn't get to do this or that. And I don't get to have the romance of being a Johnny Cash. I'm not saying you're that way. I'm just saying a Johnny, I don't get to have that Johnny Cash romance of being in that. walk the line, romanticism.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, yes, I've got all those sins that you're telling me to worry about, like pride or whatever. But what would you say to people who haven't lived the life that you've lived and come home to Jesus recently?
Well, it is really that same story. I mean, if you've been blessed to be at home with your father, you know, all that glitters is not gold. Let's just put it like that. I wouldn't wish that period of my life that other people wish their whole life that they could have, to be a star of a TV show and have money and women and be able to walk through Vegas and people know your name and let you into the biggest nightclubs and give you free tables and free meals and the whole, like, I wouldn't wish the private side of that and what that meant on anyone. My worst enemy, I wouldn't wish that period of my life. So
Help people see that more, because, like, for example, and growing up in America, sometimes you have like the Wednesday night revival service, and you always have that, that guy that said, "Man, I was living hard, boy, but I found Jesus. I found Jesus.
Yep.
I was going to the bars, and in the morning I'd come to church, and I found Jesus." And you're like, wait a second. It doesn't sound as exciting. It sounds like it's a little more exciting than it should be in your testimony here. Can you tell us a little bit more about this story here?
Well, it's what you sacrifice, right? So you sacrifice to a spirit either way, and it's a spirit that hates mankind. But if you're serving it, it is more than happy to. I mean, I was on a TV show that was, it was fun and funny, but there was also a lot of debauchery. And there were a lot of young men still to this day, which is crazy enough, years later, who would reach out to me and say that I was their idol, in a Girardian sense here, right? We're talking about like, I was their role model, and how could they be like me? I had a situation where I was in Prague, right? And walking down the street at midnight with a girl, cute Czech girl, walking down the street back to my hotel. There's a security guard, right? Young guy, kind of shorter in stature, right? Seemed kind of meek. Security guard standing on the door frame of like a Gap or like a Nike store or something on the kind of the commercial drag. They're doing some changing around things inside the store, right? Remodeling or revamping the store, and he's making sure nobody comes in. He runs off the stoop, right? Runs down, asks the girl with me if she's Czech and she speaks Czech, rattles off something to her in Czech, and then takes off back. And she grabs me and she's like, "Okay, let's keep walking." And I'm like, "What did he say? What's going on?" She's like, "Just walk, man. Just walk." And we get a little ways down and she's like, "Listen, he told me not to tell you right away to walk away with you, but he just wanted to let you know that you're his hero." Right? And it's weird because, like, at that time, I remember from that trip remembering very little because I was so drunk. Like, I was an incredible alcoholic, right? There was drugs around all the time. My relationships were horrible. Like, my personal relationships that I had with women, I was with maybe beautiful women or whatever, or a lot of women. They were tumultuous, abusive, like hell, really, And it's like, yes, I had whatever amount of money and whatever amount of fame that allowed me whatever amount of access, but it was just all that was used for. All that ended up doing was allowing me to get into bigger trouble, right? I was so oriented towards the negative, so oriented towards pride, so oriented towards vainglory, out for my own narcissism, right? And the thing is, I wasn't that person when that journey began. Mm-hmm. That's what's so interesting about it, is that it's like, it was bred within me. The more that I sacrificed to the spirit of pride, of vainglory, of narcissism, the more that I was rewarded with the ability to be more prideful, vain, and narcissistic, which in and of itself ended up destroying me mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And it was only the birth of my daughter, really, and meeting my wife, when I was really at a very, very low point, that I say my daughter saved my life, you know, and because at that point I had something to live for. But there were many times I don't think I might not be alive right now. You know, you look at somebody from the outside and you think their life is good, but believe me, like I was running in celebrity circles, and these people who are, I mean, I had
how come everybody knows that? How come everybody knows that celebrities are miserable, but they still want to be like that? Why is that? I guess that's the double bind of human desire.
That's it. Oh, that is it, right? I mean, ask Renee Girard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the answer.
Well, hey, I really appreciate this time. This has been great. A lot of interesting things that we've talked about. And I want people to check out the discussions that you have at the Royal Path with
please
your friends there. And I hope we'll have more conversations to come.
That was wonderful, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.